Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. That was absolutely inspiring. I think lots of thought for all of us here in the room. My name is Stephanie Ogueda Cruz. I work in one of these big institutions, our headquarters here in Washington, D.C., and I have the pleasure to now lead you into our first plenary session, which is the business case for diversity and inclusion. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sarah Chapman, who is the Corporate and Social Impact Director for Deloitte Canada and Deloitte Chile. To introduce as well Dr. Vivian Risberg, Senior Partner, McKinsey & Company, based in Washington, D.C. Dr. Cindy Pace, Vice President, Global Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer with MetLife. And Dr. Nguyen Nguyen, Deputy Country Director in Vietnam, talking about diversity of different regions, and the Chief of Party of the SHIFT project for FHI 360. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. So before we kick off this discussion, I want to say that it's truly an honor to be with these fantastic ladies. They have terrific stories to share, but I also want to give a shout out to basically the organizers and Fiona in particular, because this is rarely I've seen a room with so many men and women of color, people of color, in such a conference. So I think it's something to be acknowledged, and I hope that more and more conferences or workshops are actually going that way, because this is the reality, this is the world, and we need to understand this to be able to lead differently, act differently. So I just wanted to give a shout out about that. So let's deep dive in why diversity and inclusion is actually a good business. Yes, we still need to talk about this. Yes, we still need to put some data around it. And I think there's no better company than McKinsey that actually has been doing some research for the last 10 years about women matter, diversity matters, are basically some of our like Bibles in this topic. So Vivian, can you tell us more about the link between diversity and financial performance, both here in the US and, as Anne-Marie said, the rest of the world?
A pleasure, and thank you for the shout out. I think, first of all, I just want to say that we appreciate that many come to this because it's, and want gender and other forms of cultural, ethnic, race diversity. But we appreciate that it may be the right thing to do, and that lots of people do it for that reason, or because they think it's politically correct. But we actually came to this saying, we really believe that the way to make more progress or additional progress is to make the economic case. And that's been a big part of our work overall. So there's two studies I'd just like to highlight that, we've done a lot of work over a long period of time, but two more recent studies that we think say strongly our work over the last decade is, clearly and forcefully making the case, and we should stop, quite frankly, having the debate about whether it's economically valuable to have gender and other forms of diversity and spend all our energy on what to do about it. But let me just say a couple of quick things. Work that was done several years ago now called The Power of Parity. You can still Google it. And it basically makes the case globally for country leaders that the economic, GDP growth from gender parity for women can add, if all you did was do what's best in your region, $12 trillion of annual GDP growth by 2025. You don't have to go to the full potential, which is actually $28 trillion, but just do the best in your geographic region. And that there's 4 categories you'd have to improve: equality in work, essential services that enable economic opportunity, legal protections and a political voice, and physical security and autonomy. But it's a good idea for your country's well-being. And we've looked everywhere in the world. I'm sad to say there's still a big opportunity in this country alone. The second piece of work I'd like to just cite is something we published about 18 months ago called Delivering Through Diversity. And this reaffirmed the global relevance of the link between diversity, and I just want to define that. It's greater proportion of women and more mixed ethnic and cultural composition in the leadership of large companies. So this looked at 1,000 companies in 12 countries. And basically, the message, once again, is clear. There is and we can all have the discussion about causality and correlation, but there is a clear correlation, and we believe there's a lot of individual evidence to say that it's, by the way, it's not just profitability, because profitability for any 1, 2, 3, 4 years, but it also looks at long-term value creation, what's really going on. And it is so important to note that it's not a little bit of a difference. It's 33% higher likelihood of better top quartile performance above the national industry mean across countries. So again, if I could leave you with one thought on the business case, we actually need to declare victory and say the case is clear. What is not, where we're not victorious, is then the actions associated with it. But I think we at McKinsey & Company are at a place right now where, we welcome everybody and everyone's voices on this, but we want to get to no more fighting about whether the case is there. The case is clear.
Thank you so much, Vin. And I think that we all agree that the case is very nice. Like, how do we actually start making those changes? Cindy, I'd like to turn to you. And, this morning we had a breakfast about women of color and what they can bring, not only to the company, but particularly in senior leadership positions. What else can we know? What other data can we tell companies on why this would change? And also, what can we change in the talent pipeline to get more women at the top?
Great question. I mean, you just said the case has been made, mic drop. So get all the McKinsey data that you can. I think what's quite interesting also that we might be missing around the opportunity of having women of color in senior leadership is looking at it as senior leadership within your organization, also entrepreneurship. So if you look at entrepreneurship, American Express puts out a state of women-owned businesses every single year and does a wonderful job of really going into women of color. It is more than a paragraph, because sometimes women of color, we get a shout out, but it's like 5 sentences, and then we have to go out and figure out what to do in life. In this particular report, what's great is the case is made that women of color generate $361 million or $1 billion in revenue, and are generating businesses 4 times that of anybody. Now, the thing is, while this sounds fantastic, and as consumers, women of color generate $1 trillion, and that's collective women of color. In the entrepreneur space, it's out of necessity. In the workplace, they hit what we call a concrete ceiling. So we all know about the glass ceiling, right? We've talked about the glass. We're trying to break the glass. It's cracked. Maybe we're able to get through. The thing with women of color is we're managing what we call a double bind: gender, race, and ethnicity. But there's this, what Anne-Marie talked about earlier. I believe that women of color, what companies need to know, bring a level of resilience that is uncanny. Why? Because you grew up that way. Like, you were told, you come out the womb, everyone's excited, and then they're like, listen, you have to be 1,000 times better than everybody else. And you're just like, the bar is set. So you have women who have tenacity, are working hard, are brilliant. When you look at the numbers of women of color that are coming out of business schools, that are getting their PhD, that are getting their master's degrees, that are traveling globally, it still tends to be an untapped talent pool. So within organizations, I think what's important is if you have a women's initiative, you have to make the distinction and start to look at the representation of women of color in your organizations. You cannot just say, okay, here's the women, here's the number for women, because you're missing that you have a whole group that identify as women, but they also have ethnic and racial diversity. And this is in the US that this is the way that we do look at representation. The other piece is to understand that there are differences in how you have to develop women of color. And I would say the one big difference is that you got to get rid of bias in the system. Because if your practices are not inclusive and you are excluding a whole group of talent, you'll never be able to benefit from the talent in the organization. And what we find is across the board, no matter the sector, you have large numbers of diversity early in career. So this could be analyst roles. But once you get to first line manager, it drops tremendously. And in my Harvard Business Review article, I talk about, well, what happens after you sit in the role forever? So the thing is, you have to develop women of color early and give them access to sponsors. We love mentors, but we've been mentored a lot. We need some people to put some chips on the table and make things happen. And that sponsorship, sponsors who really have power and influence in the organization. And I would say the last piece is with those sponsors, they have to be educated. I love the one pager I saw from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, what it means to be a white ally. Because if you're advocating for women of color in the room, there's certain things you don't need to say. And you need to know that before you go in the room advocating for them. The way you advocate for a male, a white woman, an African American or Asian woman is very different. There are things that should not be said because there's still cultural and social stereotypes that they will not be able to let go of. So I could give you a laundry list, but really this educating around how to manage biases and how to build more inclusive talent practices where you're bringing equal numbers of women of color to the table in leadership development is really the first key.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I mean, I think, again, the business case is there, 20 trillion to global economy, 1 trillion controlling in consumer goods. So data is there. So now I like to also give the audience some keys. So, okay, we know the data is there. What can we do back in our organizations? So let me turn to Nu. Nu, you're in Vietnam and you're leading a team. And you're actually changing things down there. You're actually being proactive and creating something new. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Thanks, Cindy. First of all, it's really an honor for me to be at this really inspiring Women Leadership Network. I've learned a lot from the morning from Fiona, Kathleen, and Marie. And the take-home point 3R is really inspiring. Secondly, I'd like to thank FHI 360 for supporting not only me, but 4 people, 4 women from 4 country office to be able to join this network and learn from and networking. So back to your questions. I would like to say the barrier for Vietnamese women to advance their career in development is have 2 groups of barriers. First of all is the culture context. The expectation for Vietnamese women is family should be first and career all the way comes second. And that also the perceptions of, preference men over to female. So like mother-in-law generation, she's 94 years old. She always regret that her father would not send her to school. Because, female daughter is supposed to be housewife and illiterate and no need to go to school. Even in the modern society right now in Vietnam, a lot of family have resources to send their children study abroad. but they tend to support son over daughters. So that still have that disparity opportunity there. Second is the social norm of husband in the family should be the pillar. So it's really hindering the development opportunity for wife. And, if the wife become really advanced in career, successful, earn more money than husband, then will face a lot of difficulties, both society perceptions about that, and also the husband himself feeling inferior. And I witnessed, at least 6 or 7 out of very successful wife in the family cannot keep her family, have to end up in divorce or something like that if her husband does not more successful than her. The third thing is really Vietnamese women have a less time for self-study and growth. Why? Because they have a double job. They have a full-time job at home and also full-time job at work. So really much less time for development and self-study. There is a study showing between 2012 and 2015 and showing that women have to spend at least 5 to 6 hours for housework. Compared to men, only spend 1 to 2 hours for housework and taking care of children. So it's really a big gap for women for that development opportunity. And also female, I think, in Vietnam and also with other Asian countries have a less opportunity studying abroad. If you are a single woman, decision of studying abroad is up to you. But the selection of husband would be much less poor because the husband must be equivalent or higher than you are. If you are a married woman, then the decision for you study abroad is not up on you, is depend on the husband and the husband family as well. And it applies in my case. I married before studying in the US. And, my husband at the beginning, he did not support me, really. I had a scholarship going to Bangkok, Chulalongkorn, for my master's degree, and he denied. And he raising a very high bar. He said that if I want to study abroad, go to America and England. And in 2000s, it's very difficult criteria to achieve. But I got the scholarship at UCLA, and he have no way to deny.
Yay.
But I have to say, and I agree with you, that is take risks. Because at that time, he have no way to deny me, but he did not support me from his bottom of his heart. And very difficult in the first 6 months. Not until I be able to brought him to the U.S. to have him experience of how my life is and how my trying is. And I decided at that time also because he lost his job at this time. And if I don't step up and move forward, my family at risk. So therefore, I decided that even I know the risk is I might lose him, he might divorce me, things like that.
I think it's fantastic what you mentioned, and just to say that everything you describe happens worldwide. Yeah. Yes. So it's striking that I'm from Mexico. Mexican women go through exactly the same thing, I think American women. So that's a shared story we'll have,
Yeah. And I think also the group of on the barrier at works. So women with young children would be very difficult if the work requires traveling a lot. Our country office, we need travel at least 1 to 2 weeks per month. And that's really struggling for mother with young baby. And also I think that very important to have the mentor who really compassionate and understand and sharing the female employee situation. So I think it's very important to have also female who is in the leadership roles, who really help other female and mentors, female employees for them to advance the career. So all of those barriers, how it translates into the FHI 360 country office regulation. So we are so lucky because FHI 360 have really advanced kind of policy compared with other institutions in the country. We have flexible work hours, so it's really fit with mother with young child. We have Alliance Tribes projects, a part of our FHI 360. We successful advocacy for our assembly to, extend maternal leave from 4 months to 6 months, which is really a great deal for all women in Vietnam. I know in the US you don't have that privilege yet. We also have a top-up, allowance policy for women with maternal leave, so then still have a very good income beyond the social insurance support. We have lactation room with equipment in the office, and also have a 1-hour break daily for pumping breast milk for nursing until the child is 2 years old. So it really enables a breastfeeding mother to continue with that. And when I became Deputy Country Director, I'd be able to access to the salary data. And I think that pay equity is very important, and I did be able to analyze that and make sure it happened. And also in our country office, female are more than men in the leadership roles to really support other female. So it's really advanced for our country office to enable and help female overcome those barriers for their advance in career.
Thank you so much, and yeah, I think it deserves, and a lot, something that Nu didn't mention, but a lot of all of those great assets that she mentioned was because of her leadership, of driving this. So I think it comes back to, you can be a leader, whatever your position, whatever your country, and we have a lot to learn. Something that strikes me a lot being here in DC is how do we think that everything is in the center and that like life revolves around Washington DC, when it's not the case. We can learn a lot from other countries, and I think Vietnam is giving us a lesson here. So talking about stakeholders, and again, continuing the theme about what concretely we could do. So Cindy talked about specifically develop your women of color early, give them sponsors, not so many mentors, but sponsors. Nu really notch about, concrete step, breastfeeding room, parental leave, but one of the key stakeholders are men, right? They're still holding the position of power, mostly of them are white. So I'd like now to turn to Sarah, and Deloitte has just launched a very interesting research piece about men. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So can I just first by getting a show of hands of those in the room who identify as male? Okay, so this part's for you. The Design of Everyday Men research that we did that launched about 2 weeks ago took a really detailed look at men's relationship with work, family, and masculinity from a gender perspective in an evolving world. And I think what we found is that today's workplace culture is a barrier to gender equality, frankly. The always on, always available workplace creates an environment where people feel like they need to prioritize workplace advancement over all other responsibilities. And these people are the people that are most likely to adhere to the always on, always available are also the ones to prioritize status at work. And the research shows us that men are most likely to do so, although I would argue that for this audience, those who are in field in the global development sector experience this always on, always available as well. And so as a result, outside of work responsibilities, fall onto, in the case of men, onto the plates of women, making it harder for them to succeed and compete. Now, this isn't news to any of us, but what was interesting is what we heard from these men. So we heard things like, it's on me. So men take a lot of pride in their ability to fulfill their own duties. We heard things like, I'm terrified. Men feel very afraid of failure and therefore overcompensate with hyper-competitiveness. We heard things like, show me it's okay. We heard them men specifically looking to leaders to inform behaviors that are acceptable. And so what does this mean? You know, the report gives a whole bunch of recommendations both at the individual and organizational level of what we can do. And I want to pick up two of them. So a lot of the research that we looked at showed the value and importance of men actually taking leave, whether that's vacation, paternity leave, whatever type of leave, for a couple of reasons. One, it allows women in the workplace to step up in a way that they aren't able to when that person is in position. Secondly, it has an interesting dynamic at home. So when men are, away from work for an extended period of time, so not just 2 days off on a long weekend, but truly taking leave, they have a greater appreciation for and are able to dive into more of those responsibilities, which creates a different culture at home. Secondly, at the organizational level, one of the other big findings was really truly building learning and development programs and performance reviews about life goals, not just work performance. And so part of that is about auditing the informal behaviors that you see in the workplace. And there's lots of examples of those sort of what we call moments that matter, where we need to do a quick audit, and it's very interesting just in one day for you to go back to your organizations and do, in your own mind, an audit of those behaviors that you're seeing. But it's actually a very interesting process for an organization to go through. So, at the end of the day, why are organizations still struggling with gender equality at senior levels? This is not a new topic, but largely the research that we did with men suggests that it is maybe because men still feel culturally constrained to relentlessly pursue status in the workplace, which is preventing them from sharing non-work responsibilities with their partners that would allow their own partners to more easily advance.
Thank you, Sarah. And again, going back a little bit to your point, I think it's about allowing both men and women to do whatever they want to do and to be whomever they want to be. I think we still put stereotypes and boxes and labels on each one of us on what we should be doing, even ourselves. And it takes part of everybody to start changing that. But you did mention something very interesting. So men are saying we want permission to be acting differently than what is expected to us. We also want to have role models that are actually doing that. Now I'd like to turn back to Cindy. And something very interesting that is linked to this is, power dynamics, status. What actually is going on behind that? I think it's also something that it's very, very important. We most, at least in this space, work in every organization you have politics. Sometimes we tend to run away from it. Mm-hmm. So why do women run from office politics? And what is office politics?
Office politics has many definitions, but let me start a little bit on the power dynamic, and then I'll shift into the need to be politically savvy or organizationally savvy. We live in a world that has power dynamics, and the more that we call it out and recognize that, I think many of you are doing that work already, but sometimes we turn a little bit of a blind eye as to why is this happening? It's happening because people want power, and they want to keep it. Okay, and so when we really get under why certain things are happening, why are there in groups? Why are there out groups? Why are there disparities economically? A lot of this is about who has the power and who doesn't. And as we in this room change champions, change leaders want to make the world one where women can thrive and prosper, because when women win, we all win. We have to understand that to do that, we have to be politically and organizationally savvy. What does that mean? That's that stuff that we don't like to do. You know, we want to bring our facts to the meeting. We want to talk about why we think something is important, never understanding sometimes somebody has an agenda. So that's not ours. So office politics is really about these informal ways of gathering information and understanding the hidden and sometimes blatant agendas of others and how that will impact the thing that I want to change. So if I really want to change something, I have to be astute. And so I'm not saying that as women we will love office politics. I'm not saying that I love office politics. I actually find it fascinating. I find the dynamic between who has power and who doesn't fascinating. The thing that we as women have on our side, we have the uncanny ability to build relationships and collaborate. And that is the new power dynamic that is emerging. Now, we are still fighting the old paradigms on power. We're still dealing with the dark side of organizational politics, where there are hidden meetings that you are not invited to. That by the time you show up to the meeting with your facts, the decision has been made and you sit there confused. However, the more politically astute that we get, that means, and this is hard because I'm working on this myself, that means talking to people that you may not really like that much. You might not really be able to feel comfortable talking to them for long periods of time, but guess what? They might have information that is very vital to being able to pull your agenda through. And so what I've recognized is you can dislike somebody, but they may be your friend on this one thing. They may hate you the next day and not speak to you, but on this one thing, it's better if you win, it's better for them. So you need to be finding out, what do I need to win at getting my agenda through? And don't worry about calling it an agenda, because we all have agendas. We just don't want to call it that. We might call it my mission, my vision, my goal. It's an agenda. You want some stuff to happen, right? And so the more that we recognize that it's not bad, I'm not saying it's good, it's what it is. Use your social astuteness. Really start reading the room, reading your organization. Who is meeting with who? Why are certain people getting promoted? Why are certain people never promoted? Why are certain people staying in certain roles for long periods of time? Why is this agenda never getting through, no matter if their leadership changes? So when we start really being aware on the cues happening in our organization, the cultural norms, the social norms, we become more equipped at, oh, this won't pass if I don't really learn how things work in this organization. And so I'll stop here. We can wish that things are going to be better, but the more prepared that we can operate within, unfortunately, until the changes happen, within the cultures that we work in every day, we won't be able to succeed. So learn the culture. Find you some cultural mentors. And I will tell you, I think women of color are very savvy at this, Stephanie. You may not know, but they're very savvy at finding out who has the power, who doesn't, how do I need to get to know you. And sometimes getting to the power is not getting directly to the person sitting at the top. It's who is in the periphery and who has their ear. And this is the biggest mistake I see sometimes that we make with our agendas, our vision, our mission, is that we say, oh, I want to talk to the head of this organization and they're going to help me get what I need to get done. And we have missed all the important people who know how that organization works, who we need to be building solid relationships with. And so this is really about taking what's what works well with women, building those relationships, but being more socially astute so that you can get your change agenda through.
So I saw a lot of smiles in the room. So I guess it resonated with a lot of people. Now just ask yourself, why are you not doing that map of stakeholders and getting your vision, mission, agenda?
Can I ask you a
going
quick
further?
question? How many of us want power? Okay, how many of us want to change this world for better for women? Okay, you want power.
Absolutely. And I think we're working for development, all of us. We want to change the world. And something that struck me when I joined this sector is how, when we're talking about promoting our own people, women in leadership within development sector, we're ages behind. So I'm thrilled that this is happening now, that the movement that you're launching is, followed by all of us so that we can actually have some change. So now, going back to concrete actions, because I want people to leave the room with very concrete steps that they can take. Vivian, what could be a bare minimum? Concrete? And McKinsey, you guys are really good at that. Like 1, 2, 3, 4.
So Stephanie and I had a very interesting phone conversation about a bit of how did I land where I landed, because I've been at McKinsey 30 years. I've had a phenomenal run. I joined the firm when I walked in and there were no women professionals in the office. And I'm sure a number of you have been there, kind of been the only. So here's a couple of things. Every organization has what matters, the metrics that really matter, the people who deliver for that institution. And it's really important to know what is valued and be really damn good at it. And if you don't want to be good at it, you're in the wrong place. Like, figure out what is this. I don't mean you got to understand the power dynamics, don't get me wrong. But actually, what is the organization trying to do and deliver? So, if you do not know the metrics of success in the organization in which you are working, figure it out. And then figure out whether you care about that and want to be great at it. Because that is step one, in my view. The second concrete thing is, quite frankly, be in the center of that. Because that's where the power lies. It does not lie on, you may have to talk with all kinds of people around that who has power in the place, I agree with you. But if you're not actually working on the central reason the place exists, then accept that there is probably a limit to the power you're going to have in the place. You may be very happy that way, but you ought to know that's what you're buying into. And if you want to be where the power is, then you better be in the center of what the organization does. And then you need to take risks. And why is that? It's actually not fair, okay? I'm here to tell you it's not fair. But that's probably some of the opportunities you may be given. So surprise everybody, take the risk, and then over-deliver. But take the risk. Here's the three other things. Serve as an echo chamber for the women. I cannot tell you how many times, and I have you can figure out, I have a big personality, big mouth. I'm not afraid to stop a meeting and say to the guys, didn't you hear what my friend Nora just said? She just said X. Let's pause on that a minute. But it took me a long time. It took me probably 10 years to really gain the confidence, which was ridiculous, but it did, to be willing to do that. Serve as an echo chamber for the women. When the women say something and the men say it, and they talk right over, I'm sorry for the men in the room, but you guys do it all the time, many of you. Stop, pause, give voice to that woman colleague. It's super important. The last two things is insist on pushing against the only, being the only person. I'm here to tell you that it is not good enough that 1 in 5 women are in senior leadership. Why should we be happy with that? Insist in every way you can on bringing another colleague along, because it is when we stop being the only that we make real progress. And then the last thing I'm just going to say, we've just completed another study, at least for the United States, on what's happening in corporate life. And basically, nothing is happening. From 2015 till today, we went back and looked, and basically, we are not making progress in women's representation. Why is that? That leads to the fifth thing I'll say. Hiring and early promotion. The later promotions are actually getting a little better, but we're getting hollowed out in the middle. Hiring. More women go to university today than men. More women graduate with honors. By the way, it's not just in the United States, it's in many countries around the world. Hiring, but then that first 1 or 2 promotions. We are getting killed, at least in corporate life, in those early promotions. So if you can do anything else, I would say get very concrete about actions there.
Thank you, Vivian. There's one more point I'd like to go in. I see we have roughly 15 minutes left, and I want to take some questions from the audience, so let's try to keep it brief on this side. It's culture. We work in environments, in companies that are global, at least regional, and we're always in contact with people from different cultures. So we need to be culturally savvy, intelligent. So I'd like to turn to both Sarah and Nu. And first, Nu, I'd like to say, you're in a country office, so you need to manage basically the power that is coming from HQ and what they're trying to tell you to do, how to do it. Sometimes maybe not knowing exactly what's happening. And I'm not saying this from your organization, but in general, that's what happens within headquarters and country offices.
You mean they don't say things like, I'm here from the center and I'm here to help?
Kind of. So what could we from headquarters learn from you? How can we be more inclusive?
Thank you for your questions, and I'm from the country office perspective, and also I'm here at FHI 360 headquarters the first time. I think that first we must have organization policy, framework, standard, and commitment in place, and it has to go through the headquarters on the way to the country office. So we actually quite lucky because ZC and its agenda already as the priority from our headquarter office. Tomorrow, four of us from 4 different country office, we'll have discussion with Ms. Andrea Bento, who is the lead of ZC Hub, to discuss with us about ZC framework and how we implement it in the country office. So I think it's very critical to have very clear policy regulation there and the action plan. And I agree with Cindy is that in order to implement it, we need to find who are the power there, who is the person, the network, the person who actually can implement it to avoid any, again, a lot. Yeah, of course we have, the voice against that, or, it could not be possible, but we need to find champions within the country office in order to carry out the framework successfully. Second, I think that the leadership must buy in for equity, diversity, and inclusion, including within our recruitment and hiring practice. This means indicating in our job description that we are committed to this, partnering with diverse groups and thinking outside the box to help in advertisement. It includes rethinking our job description so that they are not too narrow and and don't disqualify potential talent. It includes having diverse interview panel and asking candidates questions about how they will help advance inclusions. We also need to have some reasonable accommodations in place for people with disabilities. In my office, we have one person with disabilities. We also try to diverse our team. We have people living HIV. We have people men who have sex with men, and we also have ethnic minority in our team members. So that help really the team look more diverse in terms of programming and have the policy around. And right tomorrow, early afternoon, for us be able to meet with our COO, Deputy Kennedy. And it's really a big commitment from our top level office, headquarter office, to move forward for this DESI agenda. So we, like I, would be the follower for this movement. So, easier job, right?
Thank you, Nu. Sarah, you've had an international, super interesting career. Australia, Japan, very different leadership styles. They see women in leadership positions in very different ways. So tell us a little bit about that experience and what are the skills that as a woman you may need to have to navigate in cultures that perhaps don't see a woman in leadership position in a very good way.
Sure, thank you. So I'll pick on my experience in Japan and sort of extrapolate that to a lot of my experience in broader Asia, particularly at the time of about 2000 to 2015, when I spent most of my time there. And Japan, as many of you may know, is ranked in the bottom 20% of the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index. There is systemic issues from a gender diversity and inclusion perspective. It's recently come out that female applicant exam scores to medical universities were intentionally lowered due to the perception that females would not be operating at max capacity when they came out, and that would be not a good investment for the country. So I was there, I was working for Hitachi, which is a big Japanese conglomerate, leading their corporate responsibility and social innovation across the Oceania region. And for meeting over meeting, year after year, I was the only female at the table. And I'll tell you why. There were 3 reasons that I was valued. 1, I was an expat. 2, I had a PhD. And 3, I did not have a ring on my ring finger on my left hand. And so the perception was that I was focused on my career and therefore not distracted by family, by friends, etc. And early on, I was sort of self-taught not to think about those things. The other reality for you is I was 23, something I also did not talk about for obvious reasons. And what I found was, whilst that was sort of giving me perceived success and I was able to be at the table, they thought I was really dedicated, what that created in the culture on my teams below me was a culture where it was all work and no personal relationships. No one knew anything about anybody. And that started to have pervasive cultural issues for us. So I learned the power of storytelling. And I wove thoughtful personal stories into every meeting that I had. I found a way to tell a personal story as related to why I may be able to understand something better, give different perspectives, and found that that was a way that was able to maintain my credibility, but also demonstrate that personal nature, which changed the culture. Now, as many of you may know, in Japan, thanks to widespread labor shortages and Prime Minister Abe's focus on this agenda, there has been progress in Japan. Japan's female labor participation has soared to 71% in the last 5 years, surpassing both Europe and the US. And Japan now boasts one of the most general parental leave benefits globally. Companies are required to disclose gender diversity work statistics, and labor reforms mandate legal limits on overtime hours and equal pay based on equal work. That's all happened within the last 5 years because of leadership at the very top. So when we talk about the business case for diversity and inclusion, there it is. And we know that by closing the gender employment gap, it can lift Japan's GDP by about 10 to 15%. So we know that, and we are seeing that very clearly in certain markets. In terms of, the skills and what I've found, we've heard a lot from the group around sort of individual and personal skills and things we can do. One of the things I want to share is an initiative that Deloitte has taken over the last year called Aspects of Inclusion. And it's something that I would encourage, happy to chat with any of you about it, and really encourage you to suggest this in your own organization. And basically what we did was, Deloitte's a private partnership, so we took partners in the firm and we put them in a room and we gave them a case about a sort of case study on whether it was group out for dinner and someone announces that, well, I won't have a glass of wine, and then there's some whispering about, oh, she must be pregnant, oh, let's pull her off the project, da 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 da, or cases about other Me Too related issues that have actually sort of happened in the organization. And what we did was the partners sat around and talked through the case and identified, what they thought was okay, what was not good behavior. All the while, we had a group of younger practitioners, diverse group, that was listening to the conversation. And so we had this different group of people listening to these partners talk about these, pervasive inclusion issues. And then about an hour later, there's a debrief on both sides, and the younger practitioners come in and actually talk to the partners about what they heard. And it's a fascinating exercise that really digs deep into aspects of inclusion and how in each of our day-to-day lives, what the perception is, how we need to address them. So it's an exercise that happy to share more, and it has changed the culture locally for us in Canada.
And I really encourage to chat with Sarah. Her and her team are really trailblazers. And I can tell you, working on Deloitte on other stuff, they are really walking the talk. They put diverse teams. They really think that diversity and inclusion is key to their business and their clients. So really heads out. The research in Canada, it's impressive. So great work. So start thinking of 1 or 2 questions, because we won't be able to take more than that because of time. And I just want to finish with Vivian. Your life was full of many firsts. Right? So you were the first women to join McKinsey in DC. Can you imagine that? And DC is also very male-dominated, as we can imagine. You were one of the first women to become partner as well. You were the first chair of the McKinsey Board of Client Committee. Tell us a little bit about those fears, that stomach ache that I was saying, and basically, how did you pass that? Of being the only one in the room, and basically gave your full potential.
So there were people before me, there were women before me, but I was an early person, or early woman there. Maybe 2 things stand out. So I did have what Anne-Marie calls about that stomach ache thing. I was not curled up in the fetal position, but I did have that. I think there were 2 things that really, for me, made the difference. One is, I actually think it's really important to know what is the difference between life and death, things that really matter. And work's important, but it isn't life or death. And Bluntly, I had gone, before I got some of these opportunities in some ways, I had gone through a really rough period of wanting to have children and years of infertility treatment and being unsuccessful. And that's as close as to it wasn't a life-threatening illness, but it was a great sadness because I really wanted to be a mom. And then I woke up and adopted 2 children from St. Petersburg, Russia, when it was all legal and good. And they're 21 and 18 now. And I think having gone through sort of separating out like the thing that really mattered and then this work thing became more, I saw it more as an opportunity than a threat. A threat is to your family and your life and to the people you love and your country and the people around you you're working with. And sometimes we all lose perspective. And the infertility thing actually was a gift. It didn't just give me my children, it gave me perspective that I was sorely, sorely lacking. I think the second thing is that what gave me the confidence was I had a couple of real sponsors, and candidly, a couple of them were men, and a couple were women. And my colleague from APT spoke about the prior CEO and the CEO before that. I had a couple of people who thought I could do it, and so when I would, candidly, I'd go cry to them when I couldn't do it, and I discovered it was okay to cry with people who are your real sponsors. But I think what I did was I set interim goals. I think there's this desire to kind of get it all right at once, and I think there's huge value in just setting that interim goal, achieving that. It gives you confidence. You then do the next goal. So it's perspective, work for the most part. The people you're helping in global development, that's life or death. But your work and whether you get that exactly perfect promotion, that is not life or death. And perspective combined with confidence building interim goals.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, time's up, but I think that this session was really bringing you some precise tools that you can take to your organization, inspiring stories from women from across the world and from different sectors. Now, the next steps are the following. So we're going to move into a break, and then you will have your breakout sessions. In your programs, you have pretty much the description of every breakout that will take place, as well as the place where you'll be taking. Please exit the hall, because we will need to transform this room for the breakout. And see you in your breakout session at 11:25. Thank you, Nu. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to all of you.